We are on page Hey Amud Bet. If you're following in the art scroll, it's 5b3. It's the bottom line. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Ki havi Natalia, when I was a little child, Amina Milta, the Sha'ilna l'Sabaye. I said something that I asked and mentioned to the elders. V'ishtakach kavati. And it was found that I was correct. What did he say? Chamat zu Tveria. There's Pesukim in the Torah that describe various cities. There's Pesukim in the Nevi'im that describe cities. And sometimes the cities that we're describing have different names than they are called at that time. As an example, what was Manhattan called originally?
New Amsterdam.
New Amsterdam, excellent. So you might find an ancient document, well, not ancient, but an older document from the 1500s, right? When they came across to America and they colonized various areas. That's why they're called New Amsterdam, New England, right? New Orleans. Why are they all these names being given? Because one was a French colony, and Orleans is a place in France. Amsterdam is a Dutch colony. So Amsterdam, that was an area that was captured by the Dutch or traded for by the Dutch for trinkets from the Native Americans. $24 worth of trinkets Manhattan was bought for, okay? So all these different things that you find in various places, right? They represented the colonies that came and took these places and left their mark on the place. So too, you had cities that were named in the Pesukim that now have another name. So sometimes you'd have to figure out and bring proofs to the fact that when the Torah describes a certain city, that city is the modern day city of X or Y. Okay, so let's begin. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan mentioned to the elders, Chamat zu Tveria, the city in the Torah that's called Chamat. That city is now the city of Tveria. But why, therefore, was it called Chamat if it's actually the city of Tveria? Al Shum Chame Tveria, because in Tveria, if you've ever been, you know that they have the hot underwater springs. The word for hot is Cham. And therefore, it was called Chamat because it had the hot springs in it. Rakat zu Tzipori, the city in the pasuk that says it's called Rakat, that refers to the city of Tzipori. V'lama nikra Shema Rakat, and why was it called Rakat if it's the city of Tzipori? The Gemara answers, Mishum de Midalia berakta de Nahara, because the city is situated high as compared to its surroundings, and therefore it's called Chamat. It's called Rakat because Rakat is a riverbank, and the river is always lower by definition to its bank, which is why it is its bank, because it can't run up to the higher pitch of the elevation. So therefore it's called Chamat, and Chamat was the city of Tzipori. Kineret zu Ginosar. Kineret is the city of Ginosar. Ginosar, why would it be called Kineret? Gemara answers, Demitiki pera, that its fruits are sweet, kekala de kinari, like the sounds of the kinor of the harp. Okay, now it's really interesting to notice because Berachot, the Gemara in Berachot describes that there's a question of which beracha you make on perot ginosar. Ginosar was a certain area that had the sweetest of fruits. Okay, and therefore we're again seeing that this rabbi who said that Ginosar was the same as Kineret, it actually matches up because it's describing the sweetness of the fruits of that area, which we can corroborate from Masechet Berachot. The Gemara says, 1 second. So you mean to tell me that Rakat is actually Tveria? I have a problem with that. And the Gemara is now going to bring 3 different ways that we would eulogize people in the city of Tveria for 3 different specific instances of eulogizing. The first one is Amar Rava, Mi'ika leman de Amar Rakat lav Tveria. You want to tell me that someone's going to tell you that Rakat is not Tveria? You're telling me Rakat was actually Tzipori. Rakat has to be Tveria. Why? Because when a person would pass away here, hatam sapti lehachi. In Tveria, they would give a eulogy to the person that passed away in Babylonia. This is how, in Bavel, this is how they would eulogize them. They would say, Gadol hu b'sheshach. He was great in Bavel. Why is Sheshach Bavel? Fascinating. Because there is a way of interpolating the letters called Atbash. What is Atbash? Atbash is you use the letter Aleph to signify the letter Taf. Use the letter Bet to signify the letter Shin. Okay? Use the letter Gimel to signify the letter, so it works front to back. It's almost like a code that they would use when they were trying to speak in a way that people would not understand them. So Bavel is called in scripture, in Torah, it's called Sheshach. So they would say, great is he in Sheshach. Why they're calling Bavel by this code name is a little bit strange. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Vishem lo berakat, and he has a name for himself here in Rakat. They were giving the eulogy in Tiberia about a guy who died in Bavel. A big tzaddik, as an example, passed away in Bavel. And what are we saying about him? Wow, he was great in Bavel, and he made a name for himself even here in Tiberia. Okay? So you see that the people eulogizing in Tiberia, what did they say the name of their own city was? Rakat. Right? They called it Vishem Lo Birakat. Yes.
Why did Rava start raising the question about Rakas not being Tiberia right after he started discussing Kineret Gosar?
Because that was the end of the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says these three places in the pasuk, this is what they are. Chamat is one, Rakat is another, Chamat is Tiberia, Rakat is Tzipori, and Kineret is Ginosar. The Gemara gave a reason according to him why each is the way it is. And now the Gemara is attacking the premise and saying Rakat has to be Tiberia. Because we have on record that the eulogizers would call their own city Rakat.
Didn't we establish last time that Rakat was Tiberia?
Excellent. That Gemara is going according to the outcome of this Gemara, unlike the Gemara said about Rabbi Yochanan. But we're now proving what we said earlier as a matter of common knowledge. Now the Gemara moves to the second case. That was a guy who passed away and was buried in Bavel. That's how they would eulogize a Sadiq in Tiberia. The Gemara says, and what about a second scenario? What happens if we had a scenario where the guy passed away in Bavel and they brought his Aron to Tiberia? Now you might think that that's uncommon, but actually many of you have been at an example of exactly that. How many people here have been to the kever of Harambam? Nobody? Right? There's many kivarim in Tiberia. You probably went to Rabbi Meir Belanes, right? So the whole area is just littered with kivarim of great tzaddikim. Many of the kivarim that you have visited are people who initially were buried somewhere else, and then they brought the body of that person from where they were buried in Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Israel. What?
Why they moved into Tiberia?
Tiberia is one of the very holy cities, and therefore, and it's many tzaddikim are buried there, so that's where they would move them to. Okay? Now, let's carry on. So this is amazing. The Gemara says when they brought the guy, so he passes away in Bavel. They now bring him to Eretz Israel. They brought him to Tiberia to bury him. When the Aron would come, what would the eulogizers say? Sapti lehachi. Those who love the ones that are left over, i.e. the Jewish people, the people who love the leftovers, Yoshvei Rakat, the people who live in Tiberia, right? Tzeu v'keblu, go out and receive and welcome Harugei Omek, those that died Omek in the depth. Why are they calling them the people who were killed by the depths? Because there was an idea that anyone that was living in Eretz Israel had a certain level of protection, because the pasuk says that God's eyes are on Israel always. Enei Hashem Elokecha ba mereshit hashana v'ad harit hashana. God's eyes are on Jerusalem, on Eretz Israel always. When a person moves into Chutz La'aretz, in a certain way, they're leaving the protection of God, and they're going unto a secondary protection, the protection of God, but through, Through the connection of an angel, of a malach. I think someone's trying to get on the Zoom. I'm not sure.
I didn't make a Zoom. I just FaceTimed him.
You FaceTime?
Send the link and I can click the Zoom on the phone.
No. Who else asked to join? Nathaniel. Just look on the group. Sorry, Megilla.
Okay, you got it?
Okay.
I didn't see anyone.
You don't have him saved. No, I just saw the message pop up. That's what I'm saying.
They're all in the dark there. This is.
Yeah, 1 second. Here, I'll do the
I
Zoom.
got it. I have it open.
You got the Zoom open? Okay, so you posted the link?
Yeah.
You posted the link in the... Yeah?
There's a little bit.
Okay. All right, there you go. We're gonna shift to Zoom, Avi.
You did it right?
Yes.
Okay, you want to put it here? Here we go.
I think it's flipped.
Did we miss out on anything?
Yes, you missed out, but I'm sorry. There was a WhatsApp call that was running from the beginning, but I guess anyone that wasn't already in it. Okay, but it's being recorded. You'll catch up on the first 10 minutes afterwards, okay? We're dealing with one. I'm going to catch you up in 1 second. Rabbi Yochanan made a statement that Rakat is refers to the city of Tzipori. And the Gemara is saying that can't be. Rakat, we know from testimonies and from eulogies that they called their city Rakat, and that city was Tiberia. Why are they calling it Haruge Omek? Because they felt that the fact that the person lived in Chutz La'aretz shortened his actual life. Just one last bit from something that we learned together in Masechet Ta'anit. There you go. You're still on it. Masechet Ta'anit. What did we learn? We learned that the fasting that the prayers that they would pray for the rain were different in Israel and they were different in Bavel. Why? Because where was Bavel?
On the water.
Down, not in the water, in the valley. Where was the Eretz Israel? On the height. So Haruge Omek, the death slain of the deep, is going back to what we learned together in Ta'anit, that Bavel was in the low-lying area, which made it very fertile ground, and it is actually part of the Fertile Crescent. Okay, let's carry on. So the Gemara is saying that this is again the eulogies of how they would eulogize someone that died in Bavel and then came to Eretz Israel. The Gemara gives one last example. When Rabbi Zera passed away, there was a certain eulogizer in Tiberia that said about Rabbi Zera, Eretz Shin'ar, the land of Bavel, Haravi Alada, it became pregnant, it gave birth to this great scholar called Rabbi Zera, Eretz Tzevi Gidela Shashuea, but the land of the deer, or the land of beauty, it was the land that raised Sha'ashu'eha, it's the delights, which is referring to this great tzaddik, Rabbi Zera. Now, just 2 points before we move on, and we're going to deal with this idea, is that I asked you earlier, why would they be referring to Bavel with a code name, Sheshach? Why was it called Sheshach if it was really Bavel? And part of the answer was because there was a feeling from the land of Eretz Israel, by the way, you still have it now, where they felt that the people that lived in the diaspora no longer cherished, looked up to, and connected to the land of Israel. They weren't sending as much money. They weren't moving there in the same numbers. So they tried, and every time they would speak about Eretz Israel, to lift Israel up and to focus on and to illustrate the elements of Chutz La'aretz that were not as good. So we talked about Bavel, Haruge Emek, the slain of the deep. We talked about it, Sheshach, we gave it a slang name which takes it from Bavel, which starts with 2 letters that are early in the alphabet, and we made it the last letters, Shin, Shin, Chaf. So there were things that they were always doing to try and make sure that people kept Eretz Israel at a very high place. And that's again part of the war that we're facing again today in modern times, where kids are being disconnected from Eretz Israel, and we're forgetting that that's our homeland. And this place, no matter how overtly comfortable it makes us feel, we can never forget Eretz Israel as our only true home. Oinala Amira Rakat. So this man, he said, the land of the deer, it raised you. Why is it called the land of the deer? The Gemara in Gittin explains that when you skin a deer, if you then afterwards try and put the deer back into its skin, you'll never be able to do so, because the skin stretches to be able to accommodate the animal while it's alive. Okay? Afterwards, the skin then shrinks back to its size. If you see a rug in someone's house of a zebra, that zebra was bigger, especially if it's a deer or an impala. It was bigger when it was alive than it is on the floor, because it retracts afterwards. So to the land of Eretz Israel, when the Jews lived in there, somehow it managed miraculously to expand, to contain numbers that you could not believe were actually living in its shelter. Okay? So the land of the deer, it raised Shashua, its delight. Ki aveda klichem data. So, oi, woe is to us in Rakat and Tiberia, for we have lost klichem data, this precious and beautiful vessel. Now the Gemara tells us, so you see clearly Rabbi Yohanan is outflanked, and the city of Rakat could not be the city of Tzipori. It must be the city of Tiberia. What would be the relevance of this on a halachic matter, other than just from a perspective of understanding things? So if you're a lawyer, you'll know that there are contracts that were written about a certain house on a certain block in the city of Rakat. Where is that being claimed? Are you able now to go to a certain block in Tiberia and say, look, I have a document that says this is my home? And the other person will say, Rakat doesn't refer to Tiberia. So these were actually halachically adjudicated things. A woman comes and says, I have a get. It says Rakat. Is she a married woman or not? If she was known to have lived in Tiberia, and the document says, according to Rabbi Yochanan, this woman is a married woman, and that get does not refer to her. So you could even have a situation of children that were mamzerim hinging on this. the death penalty might have been given to someone who had relations with a woman who has a get from Rakat, who lived in Tiberia, because again, it's not that place. Fascinating. So many of these questions that seem to us to be academic in nature.
Physically, it's that place. Just on paper, it's not that place.
No, it's is this a name for that city or not? Okay, you understand?
Why does it get? Why do you need geographic? Why does it matter what city? If you have a get, it's good in Jerusalem, good in Tiberia.
It's good everywhere. But when I say Sarah from Tiberia and she's Sarah from Jerusalem, it's not her. Especially because in the original Gittin, they didn't they didn't have last names. Family names is something that seems to have cropped up around medieval times. So if you go back prior to medieval times, your name was Sarah bat Rivka, Shlomo ben Yitzchak, and they gave a city as to where you lived, and that was the identifying feature, okay? And people knew you that way. As populations grew, so on and so forth, they then needed to have names that were based on your either the city you lived in. So a lot of people, as an example, Antebi is a city. It's a city. There you go. That's one Antebi, right? But as an example, there are many people that there's a family and their name is Halabi in the community. The family is named Shami in the Persian community. Many people. I know a guy. His name is Isfandi. Where'd he come from? Isfahan. There's a Chazan Shlomo Teherani. Where'd he come from? Tehran. So the name of your city became your last name, or the name of your profession. So as an example, you have people, their name is Schneider in Yiddish. Schneider is a tailor. The guy's grandfather was a famous tailor. That became the name of the family. So these identifying features became how you were known. Okay. The Gemara says, Ela Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Chamat. So if Rakat is Tiberia, we have a pasuk that says Rakat, Chamat, and Kineret. So now you're left with a Chamat, which we don't know where it is. Because Rabbi Yochanan says Chamat is Tiberia. The Gemara says, Rava says Chamat zu Chame Gerar. Chamat refers to Chame Gerar. Chame means the warm of. Chame Gerar, probably they had in that area the warm springs in Gerar, and therefore that's what is referred to by Chamat. Rakat, as we just said, zu Tiberia. Kineret zu Ginosar. And Kineret is Ginosar. Why is it called Rakat? If we called Tiberia Rakat, you need to explain why. What is its association with Rakat? The Gemara answers, Shafil Rikanim Sheba, even the ones that are empty within it, Mileim Mitzvot Karimon, are filled with mitzvot as much like a pomegranate. So the simple people of Tiberia were considered very holy. Go back to your question earlier, why are we burying Sadiqim in Tiberia? Because it was a city where even the simple folk were filled with mitzvot like a rimon. Interesting note on this that they bring down at the bottom. What is the connection between rekanim, the empty ones, and filled like a pomegranate? How'd you get the pomegranate? You should learn from Rakat that the people were empty, not that the people were full. And on that, we bring a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Kiperach harimon rakatech, that your forehead, your temple, is like a rimon. So the word rakatech is rakat. Okay? So the pasuk in Shir Hashirim is actually describing the word rakat, and it calls it filled like a rimon. So the Gemara was expecting you to have this knowledge of the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, not realizing that a lot of people get here only in time for mincha. The Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, Rabbi Yirmiyah teaches, Rakat Shema. Why is it called Rakat? Lama Nikra Shema Tiberia. He says the opposite. Really, its origin name is Rakat. Tiberia is the name it was given. So up until this point, we were assuming that Tiberia was its actual name. Rakat was a name that people called it by. And we were giving, therefore, the reason for why it would be called Rakat. Rekanim Shabbat, so on. Now the Gemara is flipping it. He understood that the original city name was Tiberia, and its called name was Rakat. Was Tiberia, excuse me. So why is it called Tiberia? Sheyoshev b'tibura shel Eretz Israel, because it sits right in the center. Tiburo shel Adam is a person's belly button, okay? So Tiberia is the belly button of Eretz Israel, because if you take Israel, you go right smack in the middle of Israel. Where is Tiberia? Right in the middle of the land. Now this is important to know, okay? It's in the middle of the land, not just in terms of its top to bottom, it's also in the middle of the land from its right to left, okay? Because Tiberia, which most people say, oh, it sits on the water. It's not sitting on the water that's in the edge of Israel. It's sitting on the Kinneret, which is basically a large lake, which is filled by rainwater and water that runs off of the mountains that surround it, okay? The Gemara continues. And the Gemara says as follows. Rava says, no, Rakat Shema, why is it called Tiveria? Because Shetova Re'iyata, that its appearance, it looks really good. So Tiveria is two words, Tov, Re'eh. It looks good. Tiveria is a beautiful city. The Gemara continues. Amar Ze'ira. Ze'ira taught, Kitron Ze Tzipori. The city of Kitron, which is described in the Pasuk, is actually the city of Tzipori. V'lama nikra shemo Tzipori. Why is it called Tzipori? Shoshev b'rosh ha'ar k'tzipor. It sits at the top of the mountain like a tzipor. Okay? Now, this city, we know, established, Tzipori is at the top of a mountain. We know that it's called Kitron. But we understand that Kitron is its origin name. So therefore, why did it begin to be called Tzipori, the bird city, the big apple? Why did it give it that name? And the answer is because it was like a bird sitting at the top of the mountain.
So these two names of the cities have nothing to do with the Bavel interchanging of the letters.
No, nothing to do with that. Okay? All we were deriving from that was that when they would eulogize people from Bavel in Tiberia, they called themselves the city of Rakat. Okay? Let's move on. Gemara says, you got that? No. Okay, one more time. The Gemara over here was saying we can prove from the eulogizers that they called their own city Rakat. But when did they give these eulogies? They gave when people were coming from Bavel to Tiberia to be buried. So therefore, we talked about Bavel only as the first part of that sentence. You came from there to Rakat. So that's how we know that if they were giving those eulogies in Tiberia and they called their own city Rakat, that Rakat is actually the city of Tiberia. Okay? Perfect. I'm not sure if you're being honest, but we'll come back to it later. The Gemara says, Amar Ze'ira. Ze'ira says, Ketron Tzizu Tzipori. So we're really taking apart Rabbi Yochanan. It's really beat on Rabbi Yochanan day over here. Rabbi Yochanan said Rakat was Tzipori. We undid that and said it's Tiberia. Now he said that what's it called? That he said, excuse me, that Chamat was Tiberia. We took that away from him. Now he says that Rakat is Tzipori, and we're going to take that away from him. Amar Zira Kitron zu Tzipori. Kitron is really Tzipori. Why is it called Tzipori? Because it sits on it like a bird. Gemara says, "Kitron Tzipori." Who is it? Kitron really Tzipori? Kitron b'chelko shel Zebulun havai. We know that Kitron was in the portion of Zebulun. How do we know? What does that mean in the portion of Zebulun? Eretz Israel was parceled when they first came to the land of Israel. It was parceled out and given to each one of the different tribes. In fact, it was originally supposed to be divided into how many pieces? If it's given out to the tribes, 12. How many pieces is it actually apportioned to?
11.
Incorrect.
13.
Incorrect.
That's the minute.
Uh,
So 11 and a half. 12 and a half.
2.5 tribes say we rather our portion outside the border of Israel, attached to. Because we have a lot of sheep, we need a lot of grazing lands. Who are they? Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe. So you got to take off 2.5 from 12. What are you left with? 9.5 portions are in Eretz Israel, and 2.5 portions are outside of Eretz
I
Israel.
thought they kish Benjamin also, no?
No. In fact, Binyamin, prime real estate, the Beit HaMikdash is in the portion of Binyamin.
I don't know where.
Okay, Jerusalem is in the portion of Binyamin. No, we did have that. At the end of Ta'anit, we talked about how the Jewish people went to war against Binyamin. In the story of Pilegesh with Bigivah, with that terrible story of rape and then
Yes, all
bodily mutilation. It was horrible. Okay, so the Gemara says, Kitron, we know, is in Tzipori. How do we know that? Because the Pasuk says, Zivulun lo horish et yoshve Kitron et yoshve Nahalol. Zebulun, in his portion, he had the city of Kitron, he had the city of Nahalol, and the people that were living already in that land, he did not get rid of them. Instead, what did he do? He let them live there, and they paid him a rent in order to live in his portion in Eretz Israel. Now, that was a sin. Why? Because when the Jewish people came to the land of Israel, they had to rid it of the Shiva Amimim, the 7 nations that were living there. Lo techayeh kol neshama. They were a corrupt people. They said either give them a chance to leave or you kill them. They can't stay there with you. They're going to corrupt you. They're going to be a thorn in your side. They're going to cause you tremendous damage. There was one nation that tricked Yehoshua. They dressed up as if they were outsiders. They did a pact, and Yehoshua swore he wouldn't harm them, thinking that they were these outsiders. And then they revealed themselves to be who they were. But Yehoshua felt it would be a tremendous chilul Hashem to, after giving them a pact of peace, attack them. So he let them stay, the Gibeonim, okay? Now, let's read on. So Kitron, we know, is in the portion of Zevulun. Zevulun mitra'em al midotav haya. And Zevulun actually complained on what he got with regards to the city of Kitron. Shene'emar, Zevulun am cheref nafsho lamut. Zevulun is a people who they embarrass their souls literally to the point of death. Now, because we've now been sidetracked on this, we want to make sure we understand what this means, this verse that says that Zevulun is complaining about its portion, the portion of Kitron. And in fact, it's not only a tangential digression, because you'll see part of it actually is going to figure out whether or not Kitron is Tzipori as well. The Gemara says, Matam, why did they complain about their lot? Look at the end of the pasuk. So every time we see a pasuk, it's important to see it in its context. Look in the inner margin on the left side, you'll see the pasuk says, Zevulun lo horish et yoshve Kitron, ve'et yoshve Nahalol, ve'yeshev v'Kanaani b'kirbo ve'yi lamas. The Canaanites, they lived amongst them, and they paid them a tax. Zevulun am cheref nafsho lamut. They embarrassed their souls to the point of death. Naftali al miromes sadeh. Naftali was on the high fields. Okay? Now the Gemara is saying, if you put these two together, that Zevulun complained and embarrassed themselves by complaining about what they got, you put that right next to the fact that Naftali was on the high fields, it's obvious that there's a connection between the complaint of Zevulun and the placement of the real estate of Naftali. What are we learning from that? That when Zebulun saw Matam, why did they complain? Because Naftali got Meromesadeh, the high fields. Amar Zebulun, Zebulun said in front of God, Ribono She'olam, Master of the world, La'achai, Natatalem Sadot Ucheramim. You gave my brothers, all the other Shebatim, you gave them fields, you gave them vineyards. Veli Natatarim Gebaot, you gave me mountains and high places. Le'achai Natatalem Maratzot, you gave them all lands. You gave me oceans and streams. What's going on over here? Okay? Amar lo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu responded to Zebulun's complaint to him. You gave me, I got the short end of the stick. Amar lo, he said, Kula, every one of the people in this nation, they're going to need you because of the chilazon. What's the chilazon? Chilazon is an interesting creature, machloket exactly what it is, that we get techelet from. One opinion is that it's a snail. Another opinion is that it's a worm. A third opinion is that it's a fish. But whatever it is, it's a fish, snail, worm that comes from the ocean and actually lands on the mountainside in the portion of Zebulun. What does that mean? He has a commodity that everyone needs and only he has. So Hashem says, it's true, I didn't give you this, but I gave you something else. I gave you the chilazon. This occurrence of this amphibious creature, right, moving from sea to land, happened in a very rare intervals of 70 years. Now you think to yourself, how could such a thing be? Animals, what do they? They run by a clock? And the answer is, we actually just experienced a version of that only last year. What were they called? Cicadas. Cicadas that bury themselves in the earth for, 17 years? Right? And then they come up at a certain amount of time, boom, and they invade. They take over everything, okay? So there are animals that have an extensively long clock for their migratory patterns. Same thing with emperor penguins. They also know a specific amount of time without any GPS, with shifting landscapes. Craziest things happen, right? And last time they made the journey, they went in a valley. This time they made the journey, they're going over a mountain because the snow drifts completely change the landscape. And somehow they managed to come to the exact same GPS location, latitudinal, longitudinal. They find this homing place. Who knows how that's possible? A miracle from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They make their way back for their birth, to give birth to their young in that exact spot. So every 70 years, the chilazon would come to the portion of Zebulun. They'd gather the dye and they would make the techelet for the tzitzit for all the Jewish people from that place. So you're complaining, you have this. One of the reasons why it's unsure what it is because of the fact that it only happens once every 70 years. You might only see that once in your entire lifetime, if you even saw it at all. So that's why there's a plethora of different opinions as to what it is. Usfune timunechol. Now the Gemara continues and says, Shine'emar. It says about Zebulun, Amim hayikrau, they are a people that they call everyone to come to the mountain. Usfune timunechol. And what do they have? They have the things that are hidden in the sand. What are these things that they have that are hidden in the sand? Tani Rav Yosef taught, Sefune, that which is covered refers to Chilazon. Because in the initial moment of the revelation of the Chilazon on the mountainside of Zebulun, you only see one. But then immediately after that process, it starts to rain, and in what seems to be a miraculous process is every one of the Chilazon comes after that one sighting. The whole mountainside is covered with these new creatures of the Techelet. Temune, what does Temune mean in the pasuk? Temune zu tirit. It means a certain type of fish. Rashi translates it as tuna, but Rashi in another place actually translates it as a small and salty fish. Now I'm inclined, sounds like some sort of a sardine or a herring. Why would I say that? That it seems to be more like that, because remember, it calls them temune, which means hidden. Now, I don't know if any of you ever fishes, but tuna do not hide in the sand at the bottom of the ocean. There are other fish that do that, usually smaller fish that have to hide from predators, and they use the hiding in the sand as a mechanism to protect themselves. Tuna can grow to be enormous. So therefore, it makes more sense to me that the correct translation of this fish that hides in the sand is a smaller fish. And perhaps also that is the nature of its saltier flesh. The Gemara continues and says, Chol, what do you mean that he has sand? Who wants sand? The Gemara says, no. There's a special kind of sand. This sand creates zichuchit levana, a white type of glass when you fire it in a kiln. How do you make glass? You take sand, you heat it up to glowing point, and when it then reconstitutes after you heat it up to that point, suddenly you're experiencing the white glass that comes from this expensive sand. Zebulun turns to God after God responds this, and he says, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, mi modieni. You know, when you make a field, it's something that you built. You build something up, no one can take it. But here, these are things that come from the earth itself, come from the sea itself. There's no owner to it. What is going to happen if someone goes and takes this thing and says it's ownerless? And I won't be able to stop them. So you're telling me I don't have a field, but I have this. You know what's better about having a field? It's your field. No one can steal from it. Because you planted, you built the crops, you made the wheat. Here, anyone can take anything that I have. The Gemara says, no, Amar lo, Hashem says the end of that pasuk, Sham yizbechu zivchei tzedek, there they will slaughter the holy sacrifices, but you don't slaughter holy sacrifices in the portion of Zevulun. What does it mean to say? It means that just like if someone steals a korban, it can't be brought as a korban. If someone steals your natural resources, those natural resources will never deliver. They won't produce for them. It won't produce the proper dye. It won't produce the proper glass. It will be ruined for them. If someone takes from you without paying, his pragmatia, his business deals will go sour and he won't benefit from it. So the Gemara says, now that we've established that Kitron is in the portion of Zevulun, and that Kitron, that Zevulun complained about his portion, we're now going to take that knowledge and see if we could plug that back in to our conversation. Isal Kadaitach, if you want to say the Kitron Zut Tzipori, that Kitron is the city of Tzipori, Amay Mitrahem Amidotav. There's no way that he would be complaining about his portion, because the city of Tzipori, V'Ahavya Tzipori, Milta Da'adi Fatuva, the real estate in that city is very highly priced because it's an amazing place to live. How could it be that would be the city of Kitron? Because if we know that he complained about Kitron, how could it be that Kitron is Tzipori? The Gemara then answers. Okay, Gemara says, maybe you'll tell me that it's the reason why he was complaining is because while all of Eretz Israel is famous for the fact that it flows with milk and honey, okay, this part does not flow with milk and honey. V'ha'amar Reish Lakish, the Gemara says that's not true. Lididi chazi lizavat chalav udvash Tzipori. I saw the flow of milk and honey from the city of Tzipori. V'havya shisha asar mil al shisha asar mil. It was 16 mil by 16 mil, which is roughly around, according to taking into the median range of the two opinions to the size of an amma, which give us the size of a mil or a parsa. That roughly is about 10 miles. So 10 miles by 10 miles is the area of Tzipori, which is flowing with milk and honey. What's this flowing with milk and honey? What does it actually mean? The idea actually means that they had at the time beautiful figs in the land of Eretz Israel. The figs, actually, I don't know if you've ever seen a fig bush. When a fig ripens to the point where it's supposed to be ripe to, out of the bottom of the fig oozes its juice. Ironically, actually, do you know what the juice of a fig looks like? It's white.
You told us that before.
Yes. See, there you go. Masechet Ta'anit. The juice of a fig looks white, but it's such a sweet juice that comes out of it. So zavat chalav udvash tastes like honey. So one opinion is zavat chalav udvash is the milk that comes out of the fig, and the honey that drips, that oozes from the dates of Eretz Israel. But we're going to be experiencing now a different opinion that says that the flow of milk and honey comes from the figs that have such succulent and sweetened insides that were then eaten by the goats of the region. Those goats would then produce milk, and the milk of the goats mixing with the milk of the figs, either in its nutritious or taste palate content, or in the fact that they would combine together, there was an amount of space of this flow that measured this amount. Does that mean the agglomeration of all of that together in one space? Does it mean the area that had the richness of it to produce that? I don't know, but it's telling you that that was the range of the size of its chalav udvash content. So it has a large area in Tzipori. So it can't be, what would they have been able to complain about? Gemara says, "V'chitema," and if you're going to tell me, you know what, it does have chalav udvash, but delo nafisha dideh keda'achua, it had, but not as much as the other places. The Gemara says, "V'hamar Rabba bar Hana amar." Rabba bar Hana said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, "Ledidi chazi li zavat chalav udvash dechol aretz Israel." I saw the milk and honey content of all of the land of Israel. V'havya, and it was kimibekube ad akad tulbakni. It was the size of the city of Bekubi to the port of this place called Tulbakni. How much is that if you were to measure that size of a piece of land? Ashrin v'tartin parseh urketa. It was 22 parsa long. Ufut yad shita parseh. And it was wide 6 parsa. Now a parsa equals to 4 mil, which means it was 24 mil wide, and it was 22 times 6, which is 132 high. So 132 mil high by, what's it called? By 16, by, what did I say? 24. By 24 wide. So a piece of that, which was of the size of Tzipori, if that was the gross content, okay, the GDP of Zavat Chalav Udvash of Eretz Israel, and the portion of Tzipori was 16 by 16, illustrating that it was, Megilla, I thought you were saying something. That it was roughly around 1/8 of the portion of Eretz Israel. Remember, how many pieces were there in Eretz Israel? How much was it divided into? 9.5. So 1/8 is actually a higher portion than its per portion capita of Chalav Udvash. So it can't be that he's complaining about the fact that it's not good land. It can't be he's complaining about the fact that it doesn't produce Chalav Udvash. So therefore, we're now stuck in a place because you want to tell me that Kitron is Tzipori. I have a pasuk that says Kitron is in Zebulun, and he complained about it, and it seems like he has nothing to complain about it. Evidently, the Gemara had never met Jews before, because it thinks that complaining requires a reason.
Nahalol is another name for Kitron?
No, Nahalol is another city that is in the same boat as Kitron. Okay? Nahalol we're not talking about.
I know, but why did we refer to Nahalol?
Because in the pasuk over there, it says that Zebulun got those two cities and complained about them.
Okay, but why are we not talking about Nahalol also?
Because Nahalol is not relevant to our conversation here. We only got to Kitron because we are figuring out whether Kitron is Tzipori or not. Okay? Got it? The Gemara now goes on and says further, Afilu hachi sadot ucheramim adif aleh. And this is where the Gemara proves that it has met Jews. Right? Afilu hachi, even though, right? Sadot ucheramim adif aleh. He'd rather have. He has everything. He has all this stuff, the maritime industry. He's got Tzipori. He's got the best real estate. He's like, you know something? If I don't have fields and vineyards, is it really worth living? Okay? Fine. But he complains ad mavet, the Gemara says. Okay? So the Gemara says still that was what he was complaining about. Now the Gemara actually doubles down on this and says, Daikanami, I can prove this, because it's